Wild rice has been a staple of the Ojibwe people, who are also known as the Chippewa, since they came into this region of northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan.
As migrant people, as we travel around the state of Wisconsin into Minnesota and our travels throughout the course of a year, of course, you're totally dependent on the resources, the animals and the ducks and the birds for food in many cases. And so, and when winter came, if you weren't well supplied with wild rice, you were going to have a rough winter, because wild rice was that staple food that could be parched and could be dried out and stored in the makak, stored in the birch bark containers, stored underground for long periods of time. And it provided the people that food that they needed to make it through the winter. So wild rice has been a major part of our culture since the very beginning of our people coming into this area.
The methods of wild ricing that occurred 2,500 years ago were much the same as the methods used in procuring and processing wild rice as today. Canoes were used, but then there were birch bark canoes rather than Kevlar or aluminum canoes. Ricing sticks were probably used to beat the rice into the canoe as it was pulled through the rice beds. The green rice was parched using some kind of a vessel. Back then, up until from about 2,500 years ago up until about 1650, pottery was used as the main vessel in which the rice was roasted over a fire. There are two different types or classes of pottery that we find at the Big Rice site. The earliest is this conical-shaped vessel, pointed bottom, large oval mouth. By the way, this is a replica of these pots. The pots were originally about 3 times the size of this replica. Okay, this is a laurel pot. This was the earliest pottery that we find on the site. Again, the rice was put in this. This was placed on the fire, and the rice was stirred while it was roasted in this type of pot. Around AD 700, or about 1,200 years ago, the Laurel people left the area. They moved north and west out of northeastern Minnesota, and they were replaced by a terminal woodland population made up of 3 different groups of people. The first group we call Black Duck, the second group was Selkirk, and the third group is what we call Sandy Lake. Their vessels were a little bit different. This is how we distinguish between the 2 cultural types as well as the time period. This is a more recent type of pot. This is a bowl-shaped pot on the bottom, and rather than having very straight rim on which was decorated, this has a flared rim on the surface where the neck is constricted and then the rim flares out. Also, the types of decoration that are executed on the 2 different types of pottery are quite different. In the 1600s, of course, the native people acquired metal containers, copper and brass kettles, which eventually iron, to use as instruments in processing the rice. We have one archaeological site which gives us the complete record of this from about 2,500 years ago, right up until about the 1930s. The people had continually come back there year after year after year to harvest the rice and process the rice on the site. Rice is a very important part of the economy from 2,500 years ago right up through till the present time in terms of local populations.
Ojibwe elders remember the wild rice harvest years ago and pass these stories on for future generations.
Well, way back we used to, I was just young then, of course, and we went camping in Siren, Wisconsin, and the other Indians were camping there too, and they used to rice there, and my mother and dad used to go rice and then bring in the rice when they got done. And there were 5 of us who worked on the rice, my 2 brothers and my 2 sisters and I. Each one had a different job. And we barely kept up. Sometimes we were way behind because my mother was a real good ricer. First they spread it out, dry it out, and then they fan that again. And then they parch it in the fireplace. They used to use kettles, those cast iron kettles. I still got one. But you don't see them anymore. Some people have them for decorating their yards with flowers or something. But they were really good in. And they used kind of a little paddle that they turn. So it takes a lot of work. But they did use wooden kegs. Put them on, they put it right in the ground where it would tip over. It'd be in the ground. And then some are real good. My young brother was real good at that because he was the kicker, tramp on the rice. And my younger sister and I used to do the fanning or winnowing, whatever you call it. So you can see the stuff come out, but if you do it wrong way too, your rice would come out too. So you got to really have the knack to it, I guess. My husband and I, we had a canoe, and neither one of us, we took a chance because neither one of us could swim a stroke. If we tipped, that'd be probably the end of us. But it was fun getting out there. I used to like that.
I can remember when I was a little guy, I used to go out with my grandpa. Well, we didn't call him. He was my grandmother's brother-in-law. Whatever everybody called him, Grandpa. The fall of the year, he'd take us all out there with a horse and wagon. And you brought your tents and enough food. Most of the food is all pork, salt pork. And they take potatoes and flour. So most of their meals were potato soup and no pork chops. Couldn't keep them cold. But they'd go. I never went then. I was too small, just a little guy. But toward the evening, they'd go guys with my uncle and grandpa would go out there all day long. Then they'd come in and eat, then go shoot ducks. See, it was legal. I don't know if it was legal or not, but used to do it. His grandpa and grandma would say, he would get a little antsy, Watch for Grandpa now, watch for Grandpa now. So they're scanning her right and watching for Grandpa. Pretty soon there they'd come, tired and hungry. Then we'd eat, then sit around a fire or a campfire. Get up and go again. I got a parcher, gas-fired. I don't do it by hand anymore. And I've got a thrasher, fanning mill. That's about all you need. Mine's made out of a Speed Queen spinner. And that's all stainless steel, so once you get one made, it'll last forever. I can run about 40 pounds through one batch. Whereas it would take a couple of days by hand for 100 or 50 pounds. I don't know where it ever started, but it's been a staple for the Indian people over the years, and ducks love it too.
Through the years, Ojibwe people have found ways to make the difficult job of processing wild rice easier and faster. They're always adapting and finding new ways of doing things, since the culture is alive.
The biggest innovations, I suspect, as far as Indian use of the technology have been in the kind of rice processing machinery that began to be be devised as shortcut methods back sometime earlier in this century. While the rice is being parched, it has to be being turned or it'll be scorched. And whereas traditionally people may have done this with a canoe paddle inside of a large iron kettle, someone got the bright idea somewhere that you could get an oil drum and have the fire under that and get some of the mechanized means of turning that crank and get rid of all the labor involved of turning it. There's some kind of Rube Goldberg devices. They really are quite ingenious, and I'd never seen one before, and I remember Pipe Mustache, or Bill Baker actually at Coudray saying, "Oh, Bill Sutton over there, he's got a new cooker." And I didn't know what was meant by cooker. What he meant was his own new devised wild rice processing machinery. It allows people to process larger amounts of rice, either for their own keeping or for sale.
I've been dreaming about this for 25 years. It was something in my backyard to take care of the family's rice. And I wanted one of this type of huller, but I didn't want a big commercial one. They're 9 feet long and 16 to 20 inches in diameter. So I just scaled it down and I built this, and I just kind of remodeled a conveyor to feed it. My wife took the boys out when they, well, I suppose from the time they're 10, 11 years old. They go out to Nett Lake, of course. They have privileges out there. And a lot of rice out there for them to pick. That's a good experience for them.
Things have changed, but I think the urgency, the wanting to be there, and the appreciation for that rice is still very, very strong among our people. Even though the methods might change a little bit, that connection that those people that do actively rice, that connection that we make with the ancestors, that connection we make with the spirits of that particular season is still very, very strong. So the methods might change. You know, our culture is a living culture, and as a living culture, we change. We change. We modernize. We try to make things a little bit easier sometimes, but the feeling and the respect for the rice is still there.
Wild rice is held with deep respect in the hearts of Ojibwe people. Tribal members wait until elders decide when the wild rice is ready for harvesting.
It's very clear that in the traditional part of Ojibwe culture, there were designated rice chiefs. These were elders who had the best knowledge of the growing habits of rice and when rice would be ready and ripen and so on, and the rest of the community depended upon their giving the okay before they could go out and harvest. The rice chief function has never really disappeared, although it's different really from one reservation to the next. You will listen to elders telling rice stories from their youth, and if you ask them, do you remember any rice chiefs? Well, that term rice chief doesn't necessarily click with them. But then in the middle of a story, they'll say, yeah, there used to be one old guy, I remember he'd go around on horseback and examine the lakes, and I guess we couldn't go out until he said it was ready. So, they're basically describing who the rice chief was.
The Fond du Lac Wild Rice Committee manages the lakes for the people to ensure them of a good wild rice crop, working hand in hand with nature. I came onto the Rice Committee in '90, And at that time, previous to that, there was other rice committees, and before that, back in the history a little bit, is that they were made up or designated by the clans as to who would watch the lakes. Usually members from each one's family or clan had that authority or that duty to do. That was taught to them. We're currently working on a dam project for the area. There's a 5 lakes area that we take care of. There's Perch Lake, Deadfish Lake, Miller Lake, Rice Portage Lake, and Wild Rice Lake, which is on Highway 210. Those are the lakes that we're most caring about right now, and we make recommendations and they go to the Conservation Committee, and the Conservation Committee takes them to the Reservation Business Committee, and from there they're ruled upon, usually ruled upon in favor of the Wild Rice Committee. Wild rice is important to me because of what I've been brought up to believe that it represents. It represents the life of the people. It is our mainstay. That is what we are all about. That is us.
To ensure a plentiful source of wild rice for future generations, Ojibwe leaders in the 1800s protected their right to rice through treaties.
If you look in the history of the Ojibwe, particularly during the whole period in which treaties were forced upon them, there was always in the wording, or at least the understanding of the wording from the standpoint of the chiefs, that the rice lakes were really, really important for them to retain. The problem of being able to continue subsistence patterns of hunting and gathering off the reservation is something that has been contested constantly in the courts, and I think this is going to continue to come up. There are claims that Ojibwe people can rightfully make to stands of wild rice that are beyond the reservation. If you read the treaties very carefully as far as the wording, they specify that, as in the same way with timber, although we know what a travesty that became, they talk about this straw, meaning rice, I do not give to you. We retain the right to do this, and in order to obtain that, which was a staple of their diet, meant going off the reservation.
Treaty rights include the harvesting of wild rice and have been upheld by recent court decisions. Tribal leaders today protect the wild rice in the region through cooperative organizations.
Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission was really born out of the reaffirmation of the off-reservation treaty rights. Those rights that were reserved in the treaties, not granted, but reserved, the rights to hunt and to fish and to gather resources like wild rice off the reservation throughout the ceded territory. When those rights were reaffirmed, their existence was still maintained. It became important for the tribes, one, to be able to monitor and regulate their own members, and also to become involved in the management, to help cooperate in the management of these resources. Wild rice is probably the most culturally significant resource to the Inaabidaa of all of the things. You know, there's a lot of threats to wild rice. Rice grows best in sort of the shallow water habitat, and in a lot of ways that's been a habitat that's been fairly underappreciated by people. Shallow water habitats are sometimes under pressure to be drained. In other cases, there's a desire to put a dam on them. For example, if there's an outlet, and raise the water level and try to create more of a fisheries in it. So those are major threats. Large boats can even be a problem, especially when the rice is in the floating leaf stage. Heavy wakes from boats can be a problem, and boats are getting bigger and bigger all the time. Average horsepower size is increasing every year. Pollution, septic runoff, introduction of exotic species can be a problem in some situations. There's really a host of issues out there that can challenge wild rice. And because of that, the tribes have initiated a program to try, one, to restore some of the historic rice beds that have been lost in the state, and two, to maybe introduce rice to places like artificial flowages, which have good rice habitat, but which maybe never had rice historically. It's a highly cooperative program, and I think that the tribe's interest in this resource has become kind of contagious lately. and it's really spread to a lot of the other natural resource agencies out there. Under this program, this year, we just sort of set a new record for ourselves. In this cooperative venture, close to 6 tons of wild rice will be seeded this fall. So we're real pleased with it. We've had a number of successful stories of establishing these beds again, and it's real rewarding work to look back and to do a little planning and to see these plants come in where maybe they've been absent for 30 or 40 or 50 years.
The harvesting and processing of wild rice is also ensured for future generations through teaching children the traditional ways.
I learned how to rice by hands-on experience, by learning, by watching, by participating. When I was very young, I would have to say about 6 to 7 years old. In order for me to be in the boat at age 13 and violate a rule of going into, you have to be age 16, before I made it to that boat, I had to learn the whole process. The whole process meaning is that over the years my parents would go out and harvest the rice, bring it in. They would show us how to lay it out and dry it out. I was in charge of the fire, meaning that I had to maintain a certain glow, a certain flame on that fire to heat that pot. I would be told also that to keep an eye on that, how the rice turns from a green to a nice golden brown, what to watch out for if it was burning, the sound of the rice in it, the stirring. You can hear the heaviness of the rice up to when it's almost done to come out. It's really light in weight, and it's a terrific golden brown. It's just, you can just smell it and you know it's done. You get smell, you get flavor, you get weight. Right back up to winnowing it in our Wisconsinogans. Those are our birch bark containers. Nobody, Wisconsinogans, that stuck because I wanted to learn how to do that. Because of the rhythm that these older people had, they go it sounded just neat because of that rice that you had already kicked out. You danced on the rice with your feet. We had a perfect area where we danced our rice out. And it wasn't a burden because it helped us participate with the family and keep the family going. In other words, our time and effort was rewarded by just knowing we were part of the family and maintaining the family income, because we would sell our rice a long time ago in order to buy school clothes. That's when September, August come around. That would be school time. That would be my stake. I wanted those good shoes, so yeah, I'm going to do whatever they told me because I was based upon that. That's what would happen. And that's how I learned all the way through. In order to get on that lake first, I had to learn the whole processing part first.
And how many of you eat the staple food? How many of you enjoy eating wild rice?
What I'm very grateful for and seeing is that Fond du Lac Ojibway School maintains this too in their programs, and they've integrated the wild rice seasonal approach through their themes and thematic units that they have developed and put together both in elementary, secondary. Excellent program.
Remember in one of those pictures, somebody was doing this on Keto.
I teach language and culture, the Ojibwe language and culture. Ricing was a time when everybody, all the families got together, they worked together. And come October was a different time too, and it was a winter preparation. So all the seasons had something to do with what the Ojibwe people did, because they worked hard. Nothing was easy. Nothing ever came easy for our ancestors. So that's what I try to teach these children. So it's important that it keeps going. So that's why we're teaching the children, from the little ones, from the pre-kindergarten to 12th grade, mainly to have that self-esteem and to have the identity of who they are. That's why it's important for these children to learn the language. Not just to know it, but to love it.
This wild rice time, the gathering of Menomen, this late summer, the urgency of that time has to be understood, because that is who we are. And as the schools begin to teach begin to teach the language and begin to teach what we are all about, I think in the future generations, I think, are going to benefit from it. Because then they have an understanding to know how to wild rice, to know how to do maple sugar, to know how to do these things, is to know who you are. I think in the future, it's going to be probably much more understood, certainly much more appreciated than it is now.